London wakes to a hush that feels unnatural. Outside a modest townhouse, flowers pile up in soft mounds, camera shutters whisper where music once roared. A voice that could turn pain into melody has fallen silent at just 27. The headlines rush to offer easy answers. The world, meanwhile, replays a chorus it knows by heart. They tried to make me go to rehab, and wonders why truth sounds clearest only after the curtain drops. Amy Winehouse was not merely famous. She was singular. That grain of velvet and gravel in her voice, those lyrics that cut like diary entries, the silhouette of beehive hair and eyeliner that turned a slight frame into a legend. To millions, she was proof that raw honesty could still shake a stadium. Yet somewhere between studio lights and sleepless nights, a door opened onto a darker corridor, one she reportedly stepped through hand in hand with the man she loved, Blake Fielder Civil. Love should have been shelter. Instead, it became weather. Sudden, thrilling, and relentless, the kind that soaks through everything you think is safe. Friends would later say the chemistry was electric, the bond immediate, the arguments volcanic. Tabloids called it chaos, but headlines flattened human beings into cautionary tales. What happened to Amy is not a single headline. It is a knot of longing and talent and pressure and the kind of love that promises salvation while quietly asking for everything in return. So the question is not simply why a star dimmed so soon. It is how a young woman who could voice the truth of a generation found herself surrounded by noise she could no longer quiet, and how a romance that began like a vow of freedom reportedly became a maze with no clear exit. If love heals, why did hers leave so many wounds? And why did the world, listening so closely, fail to hear the breaking point? To understand the ending, we have to start long before the applause. We have to go back to the child who learned to sing before she learned to hide. Before the headlines, before the Grammy stages and the paparazzi flashbulbs, there was simply a girl in North London who could not stop humming. Amy Jade Winehouse was born in 1983 into a family where music was both a calling and a curse. Her father, Mitch, adored jazz standards and filled the house with Sinatra records, but he also carried the shadow of infidelity, a wound Amy would feel even as a child. Her mother, Janice, steady but exhausted, worked to keep rhythm in a household where silence sometimes spoke louder than song. The young Amy grew up between these currents of love and fracture. Family friends recall a girl bursting with wit, sharp beyond her years, but also quick to retreat into herself. When her parents separated, she was barely a teenager, and the rupture cut deep. Abandonment was no longer an abstract fear. It became the backdrop of her adolescence. To feel seen, she turned louder, funnier, brasher. Yet in quieter corners, notebooks filled with raw lyrics suggested a deeper truth. Here was a child already translating pain into melody. At school, she was restless, often in trouble for talking back, for singing in the middle of lessons, for refusing to blend in. Teachers marked her as difficult. Friends remember her as magnetic, impossible to ignore. Beneath the eyeliner sketches and mischievous laughter was a girl who sensed that stability was fragile and that affection might vanish at any moment. Music became her sanctuary. Amy soaked up Motown, jazz, and soul with a hunger that felt less like pastime than survival. Each record spun by Sarah Vaughan or Dinah Washington was not just an influence, it was a lifeline, proof that emotion could be voiced without apology. She dreamed of stages, but also of a love vast enough to fill the silences left by her family's fractures. This longing for a love that healed, that promised permanence, would follow her into adulthood. But longing can be dangerous when it meets the wrong counterpart. The seeds of fragility sown in childhood, the fear of being left, the ache for total devotion were still waiting to bloom when fame and romance arrived. And when they did, they would test her in ways no song could soften. Amy's escape from the turbulence of home life came in the form of a microphone. By her mid-teens, she was already performing in small clubs, her voice startlingly mature for someone barely out of school. Managers and producers who heard her were struck by the contradiction. A petite girl with a look half punk, half retro diva, yet a sound that carried the weight of decades. Signed to Island Records at 19, she delivered her debut album Frank in 2003. Critics compared her to jazz greats, hailing her as an old soul reborn. For Amy, it was vindication. The world could finally hear the truth she had been scribbling in her notebooks. But with recognition came scrutiny. The industry wanted more than talent, it wanted an image. Stylists and executives encouraged the beehive hair, the winged eyeliner, the aesthetic of a torch singer caught between glamour and grit. She leaned into it, making it her own. By the time Back to Black was released in 2006, she was not just a singer, she was a phenomenon. The album swept the Grammys, its confessional lyrics resonating with listeners across continents. Songs like Rehab turned her personal battles into anthems, sung along by fans who barely grasped the depth of what she was confessing. Yet inside the whirlwind of applause, cracks widened. Fame magnified her insecurities. The same media that celebrated her voice also hunted her off stage, feeding on every stumble, every slurred word, every late-night stumble into a cab. Concerts became minefields, sometimes triumphant, sometimes disastrous. Behind the scenes, managers pressed for more tours, more recordings, while Amy's health and spirit frayed. Friends described a cycle of elation and exhaustion, a pattern of nights when she would pour her heart out on stage, followed by days when she could barely leave her bed. The success of Back to Black should have been liberation, but instead it deepened her sense of entrapment. She was living inside songs that mirrored her turmoil, performing pain that was all too real. This was the paradox of Amy Winehouse, adored for her authenticity, yet suffocating under the demand to repeat it endlessly. She had clawed her way into the spotlight, but found it offered no protection from loneliness, no cure for old wounds. And it was in this fragile space where the applause grew louder but the silences deeper that a man would enter her life, promising love and instead opening the door to ruin. It began like a scene torn from the lyrics she had not yet written, an encounter charged with the kind of electricity that seems fated. In 2005, Amy met Blake Fielder Civil, a young man with a restless charm and a history of trouble. To friends, he was magnetic. To critics, reckless. To Amy, he was an answer, someone who seemed to understand the chaos inside her without flinching. Their connection was immediate. Within weeks, they were inseparable, scribbling love notes on napkins, finishing each other's sentences, vanishing for days in a haze of infatuation. To outsiders, it looked like the stuff of bohemian romance, a singer on the rise, a lover who seemed to share her hunger for intensity. Amy began writing songs that pulsed with this new devotion, lyrics spilling out with feverish honesty. But devotion has two faces. Those closest to her soon noticed storm clouds. Arguments erupted in public, reconciliations just as dramatic. Friends spoke of bruised emotions, of late-night phone calls filled with tears and apologies. The volatility that fueled their passion also sharpened its edges. Where others might have seen warning signs, Amy saw destiny. Her childhood longing for a love that would never abandon her made her cling tighter, even when the grip hurt. Blake carried with him shadows, struggles with substances, brushes with the law, an instinct for self-destruction. Instead of turning away, Amy followed him in. What began as a shared rebellion against the ordinary soon became a spiral. Nights stretched into mornings, music sessions dissolved into silence, and the girl who once found salvation in song began to lose her voice to the very chaos she had tried to escape. Her family pleaded, her managers intervened, friends begged her to walk away. But Amy's heart had decided. She called Blake her soulmate, even as their relationship consumed her. "Love is a losing game," she would sing later, and those who listened carefully heard it less as metaphor than as confession. The toll was visible. Photographs captured a shrinking figure behind oversized hair and eyeliner, her eyes alternately defiant and vacant. Concerts became unpredictable, some radiant, others cut short in confusion. The press smelled blood, publishing headlines that reduced her to caricature. The fallen diva, the reckless lover, the addict. Yet behind every sensational photo was a woman still searching for tenderness in the arms of the one who could not provide it. Blake, for his part, spoke later of their bond as both ecstatic and catastrophic. He admitted to introducing Amy to habits that unraveled her health, and yet he also insisted he had loved her deeply. This paradox of love as both refuge and ruin defined their union. For Amy, it was not simply romance, it was oxygen. She could not imagine walking away, even as it suffocated her. As the years passed, her songs became chronicles of this entanglement. Back to Black was less an album than a diary, each track a page inked in heartbreak. Fans sang along without realizing they were harmonizing with her wounds. The record's triumph only deepened the trap. The more she was praised, the more she was bound to the story that was destroying her. The stage was set for tragedy. A love that had begun as a blaze of freedom was now a cage, gilded by fame but locked from the inside. Amy's world, once full of promise, was shrinking to the size of this relationship, its highs dizzying, its lows devastating, and soon the descent would accelerate toward an ending that neither love nor applause could stop. By 2007, Amy Winehouse was no longer just a rising star. She was a cultural phenomenon. Her voice, her style, her very presence had become iconic. But behind the awards and ovations, her life was unspooling. The relationship with Blake, already turbulent, had become the center of a storm that engulfed her career and health. Concerts once filled with rapture turned unpredictable. In London, crowds who had come to hear the brilliance of Back to Black instead witnessed a figure stumbling through songs, forgetting lyrics, walking off mid-performance. Some booed, others wept, and the tabloids sharpened their knives. The very honesty that had made her beloved now left her exposed. Every misstep became spectacle, every shadow a headline. Blake's legal troubles deepened. He was arrested and imprisoned, leaving Amy adrift. Letters and visits kept the bond alive, but his absence gnawed at her. Friends said she spiraled further, retreating from those who tried to intervene. Her body showed the cost. Frail, trembling, a voice once thunderous, now raspy and uncertain. Still, when asked about Blake, she spoke of devotion, insisting he was her true love. The world looked on with a mixture of fascination and horror. Paparazzi camped outside her home, capturing images of her wandering the streets barefoot, smeared makeup tracing her exhaustion. Headlines screamed about collapse. Critics debated whether to pity or condemn. Yet in every photograph there was still that glimmer, the trace of a young woman trying to hold onto herself in the chaos. In 2010, Blake moved on to another relationship, though Amy's heart remained tethered. She attempted comebacks, booking concerts that promised redemption, but the cycle repeated. Moments of brilliance drowned by nights of collapse. The dream of reclaiming her art slipped further away. Then came the summer of 2011. Amy had retreated to her home in Camden Square, a townhouse where she sought both refuge and escape. Reports from neighbors spoke of music drifting faintly from windows at odd hours, followed by long silences. On the 23rd of July, that silence became permanent. Amy Winehouse was found lifeless in her room, her body unable to endure the years of strain. The news detonated around the world. Fans gathered outside her home, laying flowers, candles, and handwritten notes that turned the quiet street into a shrine. Journalists recounted her rise and fall in breathless segments. Musicians paid tribute on stage, voices cracking as they sang her songs back to the heavens. She was 27, joining the haunting roll call of the 27 Club, alongside Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Kurt Cobain. The tragedy was not simply that Amy was gone, but that it seemed inevitable to those who had watched. For years, the warning signs had flashed. The unpredictable performances, the frail frame, the volatile relationship. Why didn't anyone stop it? People asked. Could anyone have saved her? Or was her fate sealed by the very forces, talent, love, longing that had made her extraordinary? The questions lingered in the air long after the last note of her songs faded. The public, insatiable in their gaze, had consumed her brilliance and her collapse in equal measure. And now, staring at the candles flickering outside her home, they confronted an uneasy truth. Perhaps they had witnessed not only the rise of a star, but also the slow unraveling of a woman. Amy's story had reached its cruel climax. What remained was reckoning, in courts, in tabloids, in the hearts of those who loved her. The tragedy of a voice silenced too soon demanded answers, and those answers would reveal not just Amy's demons, but the shadows of everyone who had stood by, watching. In the aftermath of Amy Winehouse's death, grief collided with blame. For the public, the tragedy was not a mystery, but a case to be solved. Attention turned quickly to Blake Fielder Civil, the man whose name had become inseparable from hers. He was already behind bars at different points in their relationship, facing charges of assault and fraud. Now he was branded by tabloids as the architect of Amy's downfall. To many, his role was clear. He had introduced her to a world she could not escape. Blake himself, speaking years later, admitted his part. He confessed that he had brought Amy into destructive habits, though he insisted he had loved her deeply. But love does not erase damage. In courtrooms and interviews, his words were dissected as if they might rewrite the ending. For Amy's family, particularly her father Mitch, there was no debate. Blake had led Amy down the path that cost her life. The tension between condemnation and confession became its own spectacle. Meanwhile, the legal system grappled with the medical facts. An inquest confirmed that Amy had died from alcohol poisoning after a long struggle with dependency. The verdict was death by misadventure, a phrase clinical enough to strip away the heartache. But to those who loved her, it felt like a cruel understatement, a cold summary of a warm, wounded soul. The funeral, held in London, was intimate yet monumental. Family and close friends gathered, but so too did a global chorus of fans, their vigils spilling into streets. Images of her coffin, adorned with flowers, circulated worldwide. Stars from every corner of the music industry voiced sorrow. Tony Bennett, who had sung with her shortly before her death, called her one of the greatest singers of all time. Yet even as tributes poured in, the narrative of blame persisted. Could management have pulled her from the stage sooner? Could friends have intervened more forcefully? Could the press, relentless in their pursuit, have shown mercy? Each question was a mirror held up to an industry and a society that had consumed her struggles as entertainment. In the end, the law closed its file with a verdict, but the true trial played out in the public eye. Amy Winehouse's death became less a case than a cautionary tale, a reminder that fame offers no shield, that love can wound as deeply as it heals, and that a society eager for spectacle often fails those who need saving most. In the silence that followed Amy Winehouse's passing, her voice refused to fade. Radios replayed Back to Black until its echoes seemed stitched into the fabric of the era. Fans who had once shouted her lyrics from crowded arenas now whispered them like prayers. Her music, born of raw confession, had outlived her body. For her family, the loss was both unbearable and catalytic. Her father established the Amy Winehouse Foundation, dedicated to helping young people facing addiction. In each program, in each life redirected, her name found a new resonance, not only as a warning, but as a beacon for change. The cultural impact was equally profound. Amy's beehive silhouette and smoky alto became symbols of authenticity in an industry too often coated in gloss. Younger artists from Adele to Lady Gaga spoke openly of her influence, citing her courage to bear fragility as inspiration for their own paths. To them, Amy has shown that imperfection could be art, that vulnerability could be power, yet her story remains unfinished in a way. Each time her songs play, listeners ask, could she have been saved had the world shown more patience, more compassion? Or was her fate the inevitable price of loving too much, singing too honestly, and burning too brightly? What endures is not the chaos of paparazzi photographs or the cruel caricatures of tabloids, but the artistry of a woman who turned her wounds into melodies. Her legacy is a paradox, a star extinguished too soon, yet whose light continues to guide. Amy Winehouse once sang, "Love is a losing game," but in the hushed devotion of millions who still carry her music, she won something far greater, permanence, a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, can outlast tragedy.